Imagine discovering that before what we consider the beginning of human civilization, our planet was governed by merely 8 rulers, whose combined authority spanned an incomprehensible 241,200 years. This revelation doesn't emerge from the pages of speculative fiction or fantasy literature. Rather, it's meticulously documented in one of humanity's most ancient surviving manuscripts, a Sumerian record carved into clay that methodically identifies each of these seemingly immortal sovereigns. We're examining monarchs who maintained their thrones for durations of 28 millennia and 36 millennia consecutively. These figures presided over the rise and collapse of entire civilizations under their watch, relocating their seat of power across a primeval landscape until everything was obliterated in a single apocalyptic catastrophe: the Great Deluge. The narrative familiar to most people might not represent the commencement of our story, but rather the conclusion of their epoch. The conventional understanding of human civilization's emergence that you absorb through formal education is fundamentally flawed. The orderly chronology presented in academic settings, commencing roughly 6,000 years in the past, with the establishment of the first urban centers and the development of written language in ancient Mesopotamia, constitutes merely the concluding chapter of a substantially more ancient, more perplexing, and infinitely more grandiose saga. The proof supporting this assertion isn't concealed in some classified repository. It has been publicly displayed in a prominent museum for an entire century, inscribed upon a modest, unremarkable block of fired clay. This archaeological treasure, no larger than a contemporary paperback novel, systematically demolishes our complete comprehension of human historical development. Scholars refer to it as the Veld-Blundell Prism, and it preserves a manuscript identified as the Sumerian King List. This document doesn't merely propose that our historical timeline extends further into antiquity than conventional wisdom suggests. It declares in precise, unambiguous documentary terminology that preceding a catastrophic planetary inundation, merely 8 monarchs presided over humanity for an astounding duration of 241,200 years. The discovery that changed everything. Let's transport ourselves backward to 1922, across the sun-scorched plains of what we now call Iraq. A British archaeological expedition commanded by Herbert Weld-Blundell was systematically excavating the remnants of the ancient Sumerian metropolis of Larsa. Among the debris and accumulated dust of millennia, they made their discovery: a 4-sided clay prism, its surfaces completely covered from apex to base in cuneiform script, the wedge-shaped writing system of the ancient Sumerians. When linguistic experts finally decoded its contents, scholarly consensus was thoroughly disrupted. Researchers had anticipated another mundane documentation of agricultural yields, commercial transactions, or religious hymns. Instead, they uncovered a meticulously structured catalogue of rulers, their capital cities, and the duration of their respective reigns. The compositional style wasn't poetic or mythological in nature. It was inscribed with the methodical precision characteristic of an accountant or administrative scribe. The text reads like a bureaucratic ledger, a factual archive. Yet the facts it archives are utterly impossible, according to our current understanding. The document initiates with a straightforward yet paradigm-shattering declaration. Following the descent of kingship from the celestial realm, the institution of kingship was established in Eridu. The inaugural sovereign of Eridu, the text informs us, bore the name Alulim. His reign extended for 28,800 years. The subsequent monarch, Alalgar, governed for 36,000 years. The third ruler, Enmenluanna, occupied the throne for 43,200 years. The enumeration continues through 8 monarchs across 5 distinct cities, each reign persisting for tens of thousands of years. The scribe subsequently calculates the aggregate: 8 kings, their combined reigns totaling 241,200 years. Then the catalogue reaches an abrupt, chilling termination with a solitary, stark sentence. Then the deluge swept across the land. To the contemporary mindset, these numerical values are preposterous. No human organism can survive for 28,000 years, much less maintain governmental authority for such a duration. The immediate response from establishment historians was to categorically reject this entire section as pure imaginative fiction, a creation mythology no different from tales of titans or mythical beasts. They classified these early sovereigns as mythological constructs and their reigns as symbolic representations. This was a convenient and tidy rationalization that permitted recorded history to commence safely following the inundation. However, the prism contained a revelation that rendered this facile dismissal utterly untenable. Because following that statement about the deluge, the enumeration resumes precisely where it halted. It designates new monarchs and new urban centers. But now the reign durations are dramatically abbreviated. Several hundred years, then merely slightly over a century, then several decades. Suddenly, the numerical values become credible, believable, historically plausible. That's when the genuine revelation emerges. The post-deluge segment of the catalogue names sovereigns who we recognize through alternative textual sources and archaeological discoveries were authentic historical personages. Most notably, it catalogues Gilgamesh, sovereign of Uruk, whose epic narrative constitutes one of the world's most ancient pieces of literature, and whose city fortifications have been physically unearthed by archaeologists. This creates an inescapable contradiction. If the later portion of the Sumerian king list is accepted as genuine history, on what basis do we dismiss the opening section? The same scribe, using the same neutral, factual tone, recorded both. The text draws no line between rulers who reigned for tens of thousands of years and those who ruled for a few decades. All are presented as part of a single, continuous timeline, broken only by a great flood. To reject the first half is to split the document apart and declare only the part we are comfortable with as true. That forces a disturbing question. What if this list is not mythology, but memory? A record preserved across unimaginable spans of time. The mystery deepens when the mathematics are examined. These immense reigns are not random exaggerations. They follow a strict numerical system based on the Sumerian base 60 mathematics. Their highest unit of time was the Sa, equal to 3,600 years. Viewed through this lens, the numbers become exact. Alulim's reign of 28,800 years equals 8 Sas. Alalga's 36,000 years equals 10 Sas. Enmenluana's 43,200 years equals 12 Sas. This is not the work of a mythmaker inventing figures for dramatic effect. It is structured, deliberate, and precise. The scribes were recording something they believed followed an ordered system. What does that imply? One explanation is symbolism, that these numbers represent long eras or cosmic cycles rather than literal lifespans. But if that were the case, why attach them to named individuals and describe them as kings ruling specific cities for exact durations? The second possibility is far more unsettling. What if these rulers were not human as we understand humanity? The list itself offers a crucial clue in its opening declaration. Kingship descended from the heavens. Authority in the Sumerian view was not invented by humans. It was delivered to Earth from an external source. This idea has led some researchers to a radical conclusion, that the king list preserves a record of a time when Earth was ruled by non-human beings, entities whose biology or technology allowed for lifespans that dwarf our own. Looming behind this theory is a familiar name from Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki, often translated as those who descended from the heavens to Earth. The Weld-Blundell prism is not an isolated artifact. At least 16 additional fragments of the king list have been found across Mesopotamia, in cities like Nippur and Kish, all repeating the same core story. This was not fringe belief. It was accepted history for the civilization that pioneered cities, writing, and formal government. They believed their world began under godlike rulers and ended that era with a catastrophic flood. This prism does more than challenge historical timelines. It challenges our assumptions about the origins of power itself. It divides history into two acts, the world before the flood and the world after. And it begins with a single, unsettling claim. Kingship did not rise from humanity. It arrived from above. That phrase, kingship descended from the heavens, overturns the modern narrative of civilization. Today we imagine society developing slowly from small groups into villages, then cities, with leadership emerging as a practical solution to human problems. The Sumerian account presents the opposite. Kingship came first, fully formed, imposed from outside. Civilization formed around it. The first rulers were not self-made kings. They were appointed. Their authority did not come from people, but from a higher source. The idea of divine right was not a medieval invention. According to the Sumerians, it was there at the very beginning. The stage for this monumental event was an urban center called Eridu. For the Sumerians, Eridu wasn't just a city among many cities. It was the first city, the primordial settlement, the original home. Archaeological excavations confirm Eridu is one of the most ancient settlements in Mesopotamia, with its foundations dating back to approximately 5400 BCE. But what they discovered there is peculiar, anomalous. The city seems to materialize with a surprising level of sophistication right from its earliest layers. Deep below the accumulated sands, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a small shrine or temple. Over centuries, this shrine was obsessively rebuilt again and again, a continuous building program. Each new temple structure larger and more elaborate than the previous one, built directly on top of the foundations of the old one, maintaining precise alignment. It's as if the inhabitants were attempting to maintain a sacred connection to that specific geographical spot on the earth, a point of contact between their world and another realm, another dimension. Sumerian mythology tells us exactly why this location was so significant. Eridu was the terrestrial home of Enki, the deity of wisdom, knowledge, magic, and creation. Enki was often depicted as a friend to humanity, the great scientist and engineer of the gods, the master craftsman. If kingship with all its associated laws, sciences, and social structures was a gift from the celestial realm, Enki's city would be the logical delivery point, the designated download location. This brings us to the most provocative interpretation of descended from the celestial realm. What if the Sumerians meant it literally, not metaphorically? What if the Anunnaki, the deities who they explicitly stated came from the sky, were not mythological figures or psychological projections, but physical beings? Beings with advanced technology and a profound understanding of social engineering, governance structures, and civilization building. In this scenario, the establishment of kingship was a deliberate act of intervention, a planned operation. Perhaps they observed early humans living in chaotic, scattered tribes and decided to impose order, to implement a management system. They didn't just teach us how to construct temples or irrigation canals. They taught us how to construct a society, how to organize ourselves hierarchically. They delivered the blueprints for law, for science, for writing systems, and for governmental administration. The first kings then were the local managers of this grand project, possibly even hybrids, part Anunnaki, part human, serving as the perfect intermediaries between the creators and their creation, between the gods and mankind. This hypothesis, while radical and controversial, offers a startlingly neat explanation for one of archaeology's biggest puzzles, the Sumerian problem. Advanced civilization seems to explode into existence seemingly out of nowhere in southern Mesopotamia. Complex writing systems, advanced mathematics, including the base 60 system we still utilize to measure time and angular degrees. Astonishingly accurate astronomical knowledge far beyond what should have been possible, and monumental architecture all appear in a remarkably compressed period with few primitive antecedents. There's no gradual build-up, no slow progression through stages of development. It's as if a switch was flipped, as if civilization was suddenly activated. The conventional theory of slow gradual development struggles to adequately explain this sudden qualitative leap. But a theory of external intervention, of knowledge being transmitted rather than laboriously learned, explains it perfectly, elegantly. This concept of a heavenly mandate for rulers is not unique to Sumer. It's a foundational belief for nearly every great ancient civilization, a strange echo across cultures separated by vast distances and thousands of years. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh was not merely a king or political leader. He was a living god, the earthly incarnation of the deity Horus and the son of Ra. His authority was absolute because it was divine, unquestionable. In China, emperors ruled by the mandate of heaven, Tianming. Heaven would grant a just ruler the right to lead and would withdraw that mandate from a corrupt one, leading to the downfall of a dynasty through rebellion and chaos. In the biblical tradition, it is God who anoints kings like Saul and David, bestowing upon them the authority to rule his chosen people through ceremonial anointing. Across the globe, from the Inca emperors, who claimed descent from the sun god Inti, to the Japanese emperors, who traced their lineage to the sun goddess Amaterasu, the story is identical. True authority flows from the sky, not from the earth, not from human consensus or military might. Could this universal mythology be a shared, distorted memory of a single actual event? A memory of a time when humanity's developmental path was deliberately and directly altered by non-human intelligence, by visitors from elsewhere. The Sumerian king list doesn't just suggest this possibility. It presents it as the opening fact of its historical record, as the foundational event from which everything else flows. It states plainly that our story as a civilized species did not begin with a human idea or innovation. It began with a divine directive, with an installation of a system from above. The implications are staggering, world-altering. It means that the very structures that govern our lives today, laws, hierarchies, the concentration of power in centralized authorities, may not be human inventions at all. They might be alien constructs, imported systems. We are left facing a choice between two fundamentally different realities. Either kingship descended from the celestial realm is the most successful piece of political propaganda ever invented, a mythology created to legitimize earthly rulers and maintain social control, or it is the literal truth, a 4,000-year-old memory of the moment our world was forever changed by contact with beings from beyond our planet. The prism gives us our first clue by naming the very first king to hold this divine mandate in the sacred city of Eridu, a ruler named Alulim, the first king, Alulim of Eridu. In the sacred primordial city of Eridu, the Sumerian king list informs us that the celestial gift of kingship was bestowed upon its first recipient, a sovereign named Alulim. With this act, the chronological clock of civilization begins its inexorable ticking. The catalogue is starkly minimalist in its description. It offers no tales of his coronation ceremony, no epic poems celebrating his battles or military conquests, no hymns praising his wisdom or benevolence. It states only his designation, his city, and a numerical value that defies all human experience and comprehension. Alulim became sovereign. He ruled for 28,800 years. This isn't just an extended reign by any measure. It's a span of time so vast it contains all of recorded human history, from the construction of the pyramids to the launch of the James Webb Space Telescope 3 times over, with time to spare. To our modern sensibilities, shaped by lifespans measured in decades, this number is the ultimate proof that Alulim is a mythological construct, a symbolic figure. But to the Sumerians, the number itself was proof of his legitimacy, his divine appointment. As we observed previously, 28,800 is precisely 8 sars, 8 cycles of 3,600 years. It was a perfect, cosmically significant number, signaling a reign in harmony with the order of the heavens, aligned with celestial mathematics. To even attempt to comprehend this duration, we must completely detach from our own experiential sense of time. Imagine a sovereign who did not age as we do, who did not deteriorate with the passing years. A ruler who was a constant, unyielding presence as dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of generations of his subjects were born, lived their complete lives, and died, their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren succeeding them endlessly. For the population of Eridu, Alulim wouldn't have been perceived as a man in the conventional sense. He would have been a geological feature, as permanent as the river Euphrates, and as eternal as the sun rising each morning. This absolute stability would have cemented the concept of kingship as a divine, unshakable institution in the minds of the people. How could anyone question a system whose leader had presided over their civilization since time immemorial, since before anyone's oldest ancestor could remember? His very existence was the ultimate proof, the living evidence that the kingship he held was not of this world, not a human construction. This is where the Anunnaki theory provides a compelling, if deeply unsettling, framework for understanding. If Alulim was not a human king in the conventional sense, but an Anunnaki governor sent from their home world, or a genetically modified human Anunnaki hybrid with a dramatically extended lifespan, the 28,800-year reign shifts from being a mythological impossibility to a simple statement of fact from a non-human perspective, from the viewpoint of beings who measure time differently. After Alulim's epic reign concluded through whatever mechanism ended it, the king list tells us kingship remained in Eridu. The throne passed to a second ruler, Al-Algar, and his reign was even longer, even more incomprehensible. 36,000 years, a perfect 10 sars. The pattern continues, reinforcing itself. Al-Algar, like Alulim, is a ghost in the historical record. No stories of his deeds survive, no tablets celebrating his accomplishments, only his name and his impossible number. His reign reinforces the theme of cosmic order and stability, of unchanging governance. He wasn't remembered for changing the world or implementing reforms, but for maintaining it, for preserving the system. For 36 millennia, he was the anchor, the constant shepherd who kept the flock together and protected. Together, these first two sovereigns ruled from Eridu for a combined 64,800 years. To put that in perspective that makes the duration comprehensible, the last great ice age ended only approximately 11,700 years ago. According to this document, the city of Eridu was a stable, continuously governed political entity for a period of time longer than Homo sapiens has practiced agriculture, longer than we've built permanent structures or kept written records. This forces us to look again at Eridu with fresh eyes, to reconsider what it actually was. Was it just a collection of mud brick huts occupied by primitive people, or was it something infinitely more significant? As archaeologists excavated deeper into the ancient layers, they found that the city's central temple, rebuilt obsessively over and over across millennia, contained unusual artifacts that don't fit the standard narrative. In the deepest, oldest layers, they found vast quantities of fish bones piled up as if in offering, a strange focus for an inland agricultural settlement. This aligns perfectly with Sumerian mythology, which states that Eridu was the home of Enki, a deity who was often depicted as emerging from the sweet waters called the Abzu, and whose symbol was a fish. The mythological texts tell of strange beings who came from the sea or from the water to teach humanity the arts of civilization. One text describes the Apkallu, 7 semi-divine sages who were dispatched by Enki before the Great Deluge to give culture to mankind, to civilize the primitive humans. They were described as being adorned with the bodies of fish, as fish-human hybrids. Is it possible that Alulim and Alalgar were among these Apkallu, these civilizing teachers from another realm? Were they the amphibious instructors who emerged from the waters to establish the first city? What if Eridu was more than the first human city? What if it was Earth's first off-world base, a controlled outpost established by the Anunnaki? Its location near the Persian Gulf offered water, resources, and access inland, ideal for an initial foothold. The impossibly long reigns of its first rulers could represent a stable oversight phase before expansion. In this view, Eridu was not a garden paradise but a managed city-state where the experiment of civilization began. When the king list says Eridu was abandoned and kingship moved to Bad Tibira, it reads less like collapse and more like strategy, a planned relocation of command. Bad Tibira means fortress of the metalworkers, signaling a shift from foundations to industry. The project moved from organizing society to extracting and shaping matter itself. Under Enmenluana's 43,000-year reign, exactly 12 SRs, Bad Tibira became the center of metallurgy, an art the ancients viewed as divine. Fire, metal, and transformation defined this era. In this interpretation, humanity wasn't just ruled, it was trained. Bad Tibira was not a city alone, but a planetary industrial hub, and its king was not human, but a director overseeing an operation measured in cosmic time. After Enmenluana's great cycle of 12 SARs was complete, kingship remained in the city of the Forge, the industrial capital, passing to a ruler named Enmengalana. His reign is listed as 28,800 years, or 8 SARs, the exact same duration as Alulim, the very first king. This repetition is deliberate, meaningful. It signals that after an age of intense industrial development and material production, it was time for a new beginning, a period of consolidation and the implementation of a different kind of technology, social technology, the technology of governance and law. While Enmenluana mastered matter and material production, Enmengalana's role was to master society, to perfect the social order. His legacy is tied to one of the most fascinating and mysterious concepts in Sumerian thought: the sacred Me. The Me were a set of divine decrees or universal laws, often described as physical objects in the texts, perhaps tablets or even data crystals that held the blueprints for every single aspect of a high civilization. There were Me for kingship, for priesthood, for justice, for writing, for music, for weaving, for mathematics, for warfare, even for complex abstract concepts like truth and deceit, love and hate. They were the divine software for civilization, the complete operating instructions. Sumerian mythology tells us the Me were owned by the great god Enki, who kept them secured in his city of Eridu. Enmengalana's reign suggests a period where these foundational principles were disseminated and encoded into the very fabric of society from the new capital of Bad Tibira. He was the guardian of the cosmic laws, the administrator, the sovereign who ensured that the new industrial power was balanced by divine order, that society didn't collapse into chaos. From an Anunnaki perspective, the Me could be seen as a literal database, a complete instruction set for building a functioning, controlled society, handed down to a chosen administrator to ensure the human workforce remained organized, productive, and manageable. After these 2 long, stable reigns dedicated to industry and order, the story takes a sharp and deeply human turn, becoming more emotional and relatable. The final king to rule from Bad Tibira was Dumuzid, whose reign is listed as 36,000 years, or 10 SARs. But unlike the silent administrative figures before him, Dumuzid leaps from the clay prism and into the heart of mythology, into stories that are still told today. He is remembered not just as a king or administrator, but as Dumuzid the shepherd. More importantly, he is the central figure in one of history's most enduring and influential stories, the myth of the dying and rising god, a narrative pattern that would echo through millennia. The story told in passionate poems and laments that have survived is a cosmic tragedy. Dumuzid was the lover of the powerful goddess Inanna, later known as Ishtar. When Inanna descended into the underworld and was trapped there, unable to return, a substitute had to be found for her to be released according to the laws of the netherworld. Demonic figures came searching for Dumuzid, and despite his attempts to hide, he was captured and dragged down into the land of the dead. His death plunged the world into sorrow and infertility. The land became barren. Inanna, consumed by grief and guilt, eventually arranged for him to return to the world of the living for half of every year in a compromise with the underworld. His annual death marked the coming of the dry, barren summer, and his return in the spring brought back fertility and new life to the land. Dumuzid is the archetype, the original template. He is the original blueprint for Osiris in Egypt, for Tammuz in Babylon, for Adonis in Greece, and for Mithras in Rome. This narrative of a divine figure who dies and is resurrected, whose fate is tied to the salvation and renewal of the world, became a foundational pillar of religion across the entire ancient world, spreading to every corner of the Mediterranean and beyond. Even the central story of Christianity, that of a divine shepherd who sacrifices himself and rises again on the third day, echoes the tale of Dumuzid, first told millennia earlier in ancient Sumer. This presents an incredible puzzle for scholars. How did a king from a pre-flood list, who supposedly ruled for 36,000 years, become the subject of such a deeply personal and emotional mythology? Was he a real, unimaginably ancient ruler, whose tragic death was later mythologized into a story about the seasonal cycles? Or was he always a mythological figure, a personification of the agricultural cycle, who was later inserted into the king list to give him a historical pedigree, to make him more real? The Sumerian scribes saw no contradiction between these interpretations. For them, he was both, a historical king of an ancient age, and a god whose passion and resurrection played out in the sky and the soil every year, in the cycles of nature. With the conclusion of his reign, the era of Bad Tibira, the city of fire, law, and passion, concluded. The king list states that kingship would move once more, transferred again. This time to a mysterious city named Larak, a place that, unlike Eridu and the other cities mentioned, has never been conclusively found by archaeologists. The hidden kings, Larak and Sippar. After the fiery industrial age of Bad Tibira, the transfer of kingship marks another enigmatic shift in the antediluvian narrative, another change in focus and purpose. The new capital was Larak, a city that exists only as a name on the clay prism and in a few other fragmentary references. Despite extensive archaeological surveys conducted across Iraq over decades, no ruins of Larak have ever been conclusively identified or excavated. It is a ghost city, a capital of a forgotten kingdom that has left no physical trace on the landscape. This has led to intense speculation among researchers that Larak was either completely obliterated by the flood, buried so deeply that we haven't found it yet, or that its name was a code, a stand-in for a location whose true nature was meant to be kept secret from the general population, perhaps a command center, a scientific outpost, or a place of judgment hidden from common view. Dominate Mesopotamia for millennia to come. The sole ruler of this hidden city was Ensipadsidana, whose reign lasted 28,800 years, exactly 8 Sars, the same number assigned to the earliest kings. This symmetry suggests balance and restoration, a return to stability after the intense industrial age that came before. His rule appears less about expansion and more about maintaining order. Later texts associate his city, Larak, with the god Ninurta, a deity of both war and healing, destruction and renewal. This dual role hints that Ensipadsidana's purpose may have been planetary management rather than political rule. In this interpretation, he governed nature itself, regulating water, agriculture, and environmental systems to keep the world stable after prolonged industrial strain. After his reign, kingship moved to Sipar, the city of the sun god Utu, deity of light, justice, and truth. Its ruler, Enmeduranki, is one of the most extraordinary figures in the list. He was said to be taken into the celestial realm, taught divine knowledge, and returned to earth to pass it on. Like the biblical Enoch, he did not simply die, he ascended. To alternative researchers, this represents a literal transfer of knowledge from non-human beings. Astronomy, mathematics, and divination were not invented but delivered. Enmeduranki's long reign may mark the era when this celestial knowledge was systematically implanted into human civilization, shaping priesthood, science, and belief for thousands of years. The final king. Before the deluge. The final chapter of the antediluvian world takes place in the fifth and last capital city, Shurupak. The sovereign who ruled there was Ubaratutu. His reign is listed as 18,600 years, the shortest of all the pre-flood kings by a significant margin. This shortening of his reign, as if time itself was accelerating towards a final conclusion, is a dramatic foreshadowing of the approaching end. Like the other sovereigns, the list tells us nothing of his deeds or accomplishments. But his significance is monumental, world-altering, for he was the last king of the old world, the final ruler before everything changed. His name is forever linked to the coming cataclysm because of his famous son. While the king list doesn't name this son directly, other texts like the Epic of Gilgamesh identify Ubaratutu as the father of Utnapishtim, the man who would become the Sumerian Noah, the flood survivor. The story is eerily familiar to anyone who knows the biblical account. The gods, led by the angry Enlil, decide to destroy humanity with a great flood, to wipe the slate clean. But the wise god Enki, who had played a hand in humanity's creation, secretly warns Utnapishtim. He tells him to dismantle his house, to take its materials and build a massive boat, a cube-shaped ark, and to load it with his family and the seed of all living things, representatives of every species. Ubaratutu's reign, therefore, was the calm before the storm. He was the king who presided over the final years of a civilization that had endured for nearly 250,000 years, completely unaware that it was living on borrowed time, that everything was about to end. His son would become the sole thread of continuity, the single connecting link, the man who would carry the legacy of the antediluvian world through the watery abyss and into the new world that would rise from its ashes, diminished but alive. With the end of Ubaratutu's rule, the list of impossibly long-lived sovereigns concludes. The age of gods walking on earth was over. The sky was about to fall, metaphorically and perhaps literally. Then the deluge swept over the land, the great flood, cataclysm, and reset. With that one devastatingly simple sentence, the Sumerian king list closes the book on an entire epoch of existence, on a complete age. After meticulously recording 241,200 years of history, with mathematical precision, the scribe uses just 4 words to describe the event that reset the world, that divided all of history into before and after. There is no poetic description of the rising waters, no theological explanation for the gods' anger or reasoning. It is presented as a cold, hard fact, a bureaucratic notation, a boundary line drawn across time, across history itself. On one side, an age of kings with godlike lifespans ruling for tens of thousands of years. On the other, a drowned world and the dawn of a new, lesser age for humanity, an age of mortality. This event, the Great Deluge, is not just a Sumerian story or a localized myth. It is arguably humanity's most persistent and universal narrative. It appears with breathtakingly similar details in hundreds of cultures across the globe, from peoples who could have had no possible contact with one another, separated by vast oceans and thousands of miles. In Mesopotamia, the story is told in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Utnapishtim describes the terrifying deluge in vivid detail, a storm of such violence that the gods themselves cowered in fear like dogs, terrified of what they had unleashed. In the Bible, Noah is commanded by God to build an ark to survive the waters that will cover the highest mountains, destroying all life. In ancient Greece, Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha survive a flood sent by Zeus by floating in a wooden chest, eventually repopulating the earth. In India, Manu Vaivasvata is warned of a coming flood by the god Vishnu in the form of a fish and builds a great ship to save himself and the seeds of civilization. The stories echo across continents, from the Aztecs of Mexico to the Aboriginal tribes of Australia, from the Norse myths of Scandinavia to the legends of the native peoples of North and South America. All tell of a time when the world was consumed by water and a handful of chosen people survived to repopulate the earth, to start over. For a long time, historians and anthropologists dismissed this as a simple flood myth, a common story for early civilizations who lived by rivers and feared their destructive power during seasonal flooding. But the sheer global ubiquity of the tale, its presence in virtually every ancient culture, suggests something more profound, something that actually happened. Could this be a shared species-wide memory of a real planet-altering cataclysm that affected the entire world? The geological record provides a startling answer. Yes, something catastrophic occurred. Around 12,800 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, a period known as the Younger Dryas began abruptly. The Earth, which had been gradually warming from glacial conditions, was suddenly plunged back into near-glacial conditions for over 1,000 years. The cause of this sudden climate shift is the subject of intense scientific debate and research. But one of the leading theories is the impact of one or more comets or asteroids over the North American ice sheet. The immense heat from the impacts would have instantly vaporized a massive amount of ice, while also destabilizing the entire ice sheet structurally, leading to a catastrophic meltwater pulse into the world's oceans. The result would have been a rapid sea level rise on a global scale, mega tsunamis hundreds of feet high, and catastrophic coastal flooding that would have wiped out any civilization living near the shore, which is where most human settlements have always been located. This is the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, and it provides a terrifyingly plausible scientific basis for the myth of a worldwide flood. Archaeology provides another piece of the puzzle, more localized but still significant. Excavations in southern Iraq at the site of the ancient city of Shuruppak, the final antediluvian capital, uncovered a thick uniform layer of river silt, nearly 10 feet deep in some places, dating to around 2900 BCE. This flood layer cleanly separates the earlier strata of the city from the later ones, marking a clear disruption. The city was clearly hit by a devastating flood that interrupted its history dramatically. While this specific event was a regional river flood caused by the Tigris and Euphrates overflowing, not a global cataclysm, its memory may have merged with the older, deeper collective memory of the Younger Dryas event to create the epic flood myth we know today, combining personal experience with ancestral memory. The Sumerian king list, however, treats the flood as more than just a natural disaster, more than mere environmental catastrophe. It is a fundamental turning point in the nature of reality itself, a cosmic reset. Before the flood, kings were for all intents and purposes immortal, living for tens of thousands of years. After the flood, they became human, mortal. The lifespans recorded on the Prism contract dramatically from tens of thousands of years to mere centuries, and then gradually to the familiar lifespans we know today. It's as if the flood washed away not just cities and populations, but a specific kind of biological or spiritual longevity, as if the rules governing life itself changed. The Bible mirrors this exact concept with remarkable precision. Before the flood, patriarchs like Methuselah lived for nearly a millennium, 969 years. After the flood, God explicitly shortens the human lifespan, declaring in Genesis chapter 6, verse 3, "My spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years." Both traditions, Sumerian and Hebrew, record a deliberate divine limiting, a nerfing of humanity in the flood's aftermath, a reduction of human potential and longevity. From the perspective of the Anunnaki theory, the flood takes on an even more sinister and deliberate character. Was it merely an accident of nature that they simply allowed to happen, standing by as the waters rose? Or was it a tool, a controlled demolition, a deliberate culling? Some theorists have proposed that the Anunnaki themselves triggered the cataclysm, perhaps by using advanced technology to destabilize the Antarctic ice sheet, or by timing their operations with the natural orbit of Nibiru to maximize catastrophic effects, as a way to wipe the slate clean, to start the project over. In this version of the story, humanity had become unruly, difficult to control, or perhaps the hybridization experiment had produced undesirable results, genetic anomalies like the Nephilim. The flood was a reset button, a way to eliminate the majority of the population and start over with a more manageable, more compliant group of survivors, a controlled breeding population. The story of Enki secretly warning Utnapishtim then becomes an act of rebellion, a compassionate scientist saving his creation from his more ruthless colleagues in the Anunnaki hierarchy. This interpretation paints the flood not as an act of God's wrath, but as an act of industrial-scale genocide, of planetary cleansing. The survivors like Utnapishtim were not just lucky or favored by chance. They were chosen, selected. They were the genetic stock selected to rebuild the world, to repopulate the earth, perhaps with new built-in limitations like a dramatically shorter lifespan to ensure they would never again challenge their creators, never again threaten to become like the gods. Regardless of its ultimate cause, natural disaster, divine judgment, or extraterrestrial intervention, the flood serves as the great filter of human history. It separates myth from verifiable historical records, gods from men, and an age of impossible longevity from our own fleeting mortal existence. It is the scar on our collective psyche, the great trauma, a memory of a time when the world we knew was completely and utterly erased, when everything ended, when the waters finally receded, leaving behind a landscape of mud and devastation. The world was new, but it was also profoundly diminished. The direct link to the heavens seemed to have been severed, the connection broken. Humanity was for the first time truly on its own, alone. And it would be up to a new breed of king, mortal and limited, to lead them out of the mud and rebuild civilization from its ruins, the new world, Gilgamesh, and the bridge between ages. When the waters of the great deluge receded, slowly draining away, they left behind a world scoured clean, a blank slate upon which a new history would be written with different rules. The Sumerian king list marks this new beginning, with the same dispassionate tone it used to describe the end, maintaining its bureaucratic style. After the deluge had swept over, and the kingship had descended from the celestial realm once more, the kingship was established in Kish. The age of godlike sovereigns was over, finished. The new era belonged to men, to mortals. The reigns listed now are dramatically shorter, more believable to our modern minds. The first post-flood dynasty in the city of Kish has kings who rule for 960 years, 840 years, or 300 years. Still incredibly long by our standards, still superhuman, but a tiny fraction of the reigns before the flood. And as the list moves forward in time, progressing through generations, the numbers continue to shrink steadily until they become entirely plausible historical reigns of 20, 30, or 40 years, durations that match what we know from later verified records. It is in this new, more grounded reality that we encounter the single most important figure on the entire prism, the linchpin, Gilgamesh, the fifth king of the first dynasty of Uruk. The king list records his reign with its usual brevity, its characteristic minimalism, the divine Gilgamesh. His father was a phantom. His reign was 126 years. But unlike the silent phantoms of the antediluvian age, the nameless kings of the pre-flood world, Gilgamesh explodes out of the cuneiform and into history as a fully formed character, as a human being we can understand. He is the hero of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the world's first great work of literature, an epic poem that predates Homer's Iliad by at least 1,500 years, making it humanity's oldest surviving story. His story, pieced together painstakingly from fragments of clay tablets discovered across Mesopotamia, tells of a powerful, arrogant king who is 2/3 god and 1/3 man, a demigod who rules his city of Uruk with an iron fist, oppressing his people. To humble him, to teach him compassion, the gods create a wild man named Enkidu, who becomes his rival, then his equal, then his best friend and companion. Together they embark on heroic adventures, slaying monsters like Humbaba and the Bull of Heaven, defying the gods themselves. But when Enkidu is condemned to die as punishment for their hubris, Gilgamesh is shattered by grief and for the first time confronted with his own mortality, with the reality of death. This is where his story becomes a crucial bridge between the two halves of the king list, connecting the ancient past with the historical present. Terrified of death, desperate to escape his fate, Gilgamesh embarks on a desperate quest for immortality, for the secret of eternal life. He decides to seek out the one man who is said to have escaped death, the sole survivor of the ancient world, Utnapishtim, the one who survived the Great Flood. After a long and perilous journey to the ends of the earth, crossing the waters of death itself, he finds the ancient sage living in a distant paradise. Utnapishtim then tells Gilgamesh the entire story of the flood from a first-person perspective, as an eyewitness. The god's decision to destroy humanity, the secret warning from Enki delivered in a dream, the construction of the cube-shaped ark, the terrifying storm that lasted 6 days and 7 nights, the landing on the mountain, and the divine gift of eternal life that he and his wife were granted as a reward for their faithfulness. Gilgamesh is listening to a direct, living link to the world before the flood, to the antediluvian age. The story confirms that the events described by the king list were understood by the Mesopotamians not as myth or allegory, but as a real event in their history, as something that actually happened. Utnapishtim is the living proof, the evidence that the old world existed. But when Gilgamesh begs for the secret to eternal life, pleading for the same gift, Utnapishtim tells him the hard truth, the bitter reality. That gift was a one-time deal, a special dispensation. The age of immortals is over, finished forever. The gods have decreed that for mankind, death is the ultimate fate, the final boundary. In this single poignant moment, the epic confirms the great reset described by the king list. The bridge to the past is there, visible, but the door is closed and locked. Gilgamesh, despite being two-thirds divine, carrying the blood of the gods, is locked into the new mortal reality. He ultimately fails in his quest and returns to his city of Uruk, having learned the bitter lesson that true immortality can only be found in the great deeds and lasting works one leaves behind, in legacy rather than longevity. For a long time, scholars and historians believed Gilgamesh was a purely mythological character, no more real than Hercules or King Arthur. But then archaeology began to catch up with the myth, to verify the story. In the 19th and 20th centuries, excavators unearthed the sprawling ruins of the ancient city of Uruk, one of the first true cities in world history. They found massive city walls exactly as the epic described them, walls so large they seemed impossible. They found historical inscriptions that named other kings from Gilgamesh's dynasty, kings listed on the prism. Gilgamesh's name itself appears in other contemporary texts as a real historical king who ruled Uruk. He wasn't a myth, he was a memory, a real ruler whose life and deeds were so extraordinary that they became the foundation for centuries of legend and storytelling. This is what makes Gilgamesh the linchpin of the entire Sumerian king list, the crucial connecting piece. He is the anchor that moors the seemingly fantastical first half of the document to the verifiable reality of the second half. Because Gilgamesh is real, confirmed by archaeology, it forces us to take the entire list more seriously. The scribe who recorded Gilgamesh's reign of 126 years is the same scribe who recorded Alulim's reign of 28,800 years. To the author, to the original writer, they were both equally historical, both part of the same continuous record. There was no distinction in the mind of the scribe between myth and history. Gilgamesh's part divine nature, being two-thirds god and one-third man, also serves as a tantalizing clue about the nature of the antediluvian world. Was this a poetic description of his immense power and larger-than-life character, or a literal memory of the Anunnaki legacy flowing in his veins? He could be seen as a product of the tail end of the hybridization program, a descendant of the divine bloodlines that had become diluted over time through interbreeding. His quest for immortality wasn't just a metaphor for the universal human condition, for our fear of death. It was a literal attempt to reclaim the birthright of his ancestors, the longevity that was lost in the flood, to reconnect with his divine heritage. His failure marks the final tragic end of that connection, the severing of the last thread. After Gilgamesh, the divine spark seems to fade completely from the royal bloodlines, and the kings of Mesopotamia become fully, tragically human, mortal in every sense. He stands on the shoreline between history and myth, between the world of gods and the world of men. 1 foot in each realm. The perfect hero for an age of transition, for humanity's passage into a new reality. The global echo, universal flood myths, and the shared memory. The story etched into the Sumerian king list, of a lost age of impossibly long-lived rulers brought to an abrupt end by a world-altering flood, would be astonishing enough if it were an isolated tale unique to one culture. But it's not isolated at all. The same narrative framework, the same story structure. A golden age of longevity, a great cataclysm, followed by a new era of shortened human lifespans, appears like a persistent echo, like a haunting refrain, in the foundational texts of other major civilizations across the world. It's as if the core components of this Sumerian memory were smuggled out of the flood on different arcs, preserved in the oral traditions of the survivors scattered across the globe, and eventually written down in different languages and different lands, each culture preserving their version. The most striking and well-known parallel is found in the early chapters of the book of Genesis in the Hebrew Bible. The Bible's list of the patriarchs from Adam to Noah reads like a direct, albeit condensed, echo of the Sumerian antediluvian kings. Adam is said to have lived 930 years. His son Seth lived 912 years. His grandson Enos lived 905 years. The list continues for 10 generations, each patriarch living for centuries, culminating in the most famous long-lived figure of all, Methuselah, who reached the age of 969 years, before dying just before the flood. While these lifespans are counted in centuries rather than the Sumerian millennia, spanning hundreds rather than thousands of years, the underlying principle is identical. Before the flood, humans lived for extraordinarily long periods of time, far beyond normal human experience. The Bible even has its own Enoch, a man who walked with God and was taken directly to heaven without dying, who ascended. A story that mirrors precisely the Sumerian king Enmeduranki of Sippar, who also ascended to the heavens to receive divine knowledge. Then, just like in the Sumerian record, the flood comes and acts as a great dividing line, a watershed moment. After Noah and the Ark, lifespans begin a steady and dramatic decline. The post-flood patriarchs like Abraham live for 175 years, Moses for 120 years, and by the time of King David and the later biblical period, the psalmist declares the human lifespan to be a mere 70 or 80 years, what we consider normal today. The narrative arc is precisely the same as the king list. A lost golden age of longevity, a watery cataclysm, and a new diminished world where humans are mortal and limited. For centuries, scholars explained this away by suggesting the Hebrew authors during their exile in Babylon in the 6th century BC. He simply borrowed and adapted Mesopotamian myths they encountered there, that they plagiarized or were influenced by Sumerian stories. But the similarities may run deeper than literary theft or cultural borrowing. What if both the Sumerian and Hebrew texts are drawing from a common, much older source of memory? A shared historical tradition about the true nature of the world before the flood, passed down by different branches of survivors who went their separate ways after the cataclysm, preserving the story independently. The echo doesn't stop in the Middle East. It reverberates across the ancient world. In ancient Egypt, the historian Manetho, writing in the 3rd century BC, compiled a comprehensive history of his country's dynasties. Like the Sumerian king list, his work begins with a lost primordial age. He lists a series of divine beings, gods and demigods, who ruled Egypt for a period totaling thousands of years before the first mortal pharaoh, Menes, unified the country around 3000 BCE. The famous Turin king papyrus, a badly damaged document from the reign of Ramesses II, confirms this tradition, beginning its list of rulers with dynasties of gods who reigned for vast mythological spans of time before the historical period. Once again, we see the same pattern, a belief in a real historical epoch when divine or semi-divine beings ruled the land for periods far exceeding human lifespans, an age that preceded and gave birth to the historical dynasties we can verify. The pattern repeats with almost monotonous regularity across the globe in every ancient culture. In ancient India, Hindu cosmology describes a cycle of 4 great yugas, or age. The first and most perfect age, the Satya Yuga, or Golden Age, was a paradise where humans were said to be gigantic, powerful, virtuous, and lived for 100,000 years. As each successive yuga unfolds, humanity's lifespan, virtue, physical stature, and spiritual power decline progressively, leading to our current degraded age, the Kali Yuga, where we are small, weak, and short-lived. In China, ancient legends speak of a series of sage kings and divine emperors who ruled in the dawn of time, bringing the gifts of civilization, including agriculture, writing and medicine, and living for hundreds of years. The Yellow Emperor, for example, was said to have reigned for a century before ascending to heaven in a dragon. What are we to make of this global consensus, this universal theme? Is it simply a universal human tendency to romanticize the past, to invent a golden age of giants and gods as a psychological comfort? Or is it a genuine, deeply ingrained memory, a piece of historical data that has been preserved in the amber of myth, transmitted orally for thousands of years before being written down? If it is a memory, an actual recollection of events, then the Sumerian king list is simply the most detailed and bureaucratic version of it that has survived into our time. It suggests that the antediluvian civilization it describes was not a local Mesopotamian phenomenon, not confined to one river valley. It was a global phenomenon, a worldwide system. The kingship that descended from heaven may have been a planetary system of governance, a global administration. The flood in this context becomes an event that shattered a connected world, a unified civilization, throwing the survivors into a dark age, scattered and isolated. In their isolation, separated by vast distances, each group preserved the memory of the before times, the antediluvian world in their own unique cultural way, filtered through their own language and symbolism. But the core elements remain the same across all versions. This theory offers a radical new lens through which to view ancient myths. They are not just fanciful stories told around campfires to entertain or to explain natural phenomena. They are corrupted data files, fragmented historical records of a lost chapter of human history. The gods of the Greeks, the Devas of the Hindus, the Elohim of the Bible, and the Anunnaki of the Sumerians could all be different names, different cultural interpretations, for the same group of powerful, long-lived beings who governed the planet before the Great Reset, before the flood that ended their direct rule. The Sumerian king list, in its dry numerical precision, its bureaucratic style, may be the closest thing we have to the original uncorrupted master file of that forgotten age. It provides the names, the locations, and the precise timeline that other cultures only remembered in the dreamlike, symbolic language of myth and legend. It's the historical backbone, the factual framework upon which the world's mythologies were built, the skeleton on which the flesh of story was added. Conclusion: the legacy of mystery. The Sumerian king list presents us with a set of facts, a historical document that are fundamentally irreconcilable with our conventional understanding of history and human development. The mainstream explanations, that the long rains are merely symbolic, or that the entire pre-flood section is pure myth and fantasy, begin to feel inadequate when examined closely. They are explanations that dismiss the evidence rather than engage with it honestly. They crumble under the sheer mathematical precision of the rains and the uncanny parallels in global mythology, the universal nature of the flood story. To truly confront the mystery honestly, we need a theory that takes the document at its word, that respects what it says. In the 1970s, a rogue scholar named Zecharia Sitchin did exactly that. He proposed a breathtaking, all-encompassing theory that reframed the entire history of the human race. To Sitchin, the king list wasn't a myth or a symbolic document. It was a heavily redacted corporate history. an administrative record of an extraterrestrial intervention on planet Earth, an alien colonization project. Sitchin was a scholar fluent in Sumerian and other ancient Semitic languages. As he read the cuneiform texts, he claimed to find a story that all other translators had missed or willfully ignored. The key, he insisted, was a single misunderstood celestial body. The Sumerians had a deep and sophisticated understanding of astronomy, recognizing the sun, the moon, and the planets out to Saturn. But Sitchin claimed their text spoke of one more, a massive undiscovered 12th member of our solar system, counting the sun and moon, which he called Nibiru, the planet of the crossing. According to his translations, Nibiru was not in a stable circular orbit like the other planets. Instead, it moved in a vast elliptical path that brought it through the inner solar system only once every 3,600 Earth years, 1 SAR, before flinging it back out into the darkness of deep space. That number, 3,600 years, was Sitchin's Rosetta Stone, his key to understanding everything. It was a perfect, stunning match for the Sumerian unit of time known as the SAR, the very unit used to calculate the impossibly long reigns of the antediluvian kings. Suddenly, the numbers on the king list snapped into focus. The reigns of 28,800 years, 8 SARs, or 43,200 years, 12 SARs, were not symbolic counts of Earth years. They were literal counts of Nibiru's orbital periods. The scribes were using the calendar of the gods, the Anunnaki home planet's year, not the calendar of men. The beings who ruled before the flood, Sitchin argued, were the inhabitants of Nibiru. They were the Anunnaki, a term he translated literally as those who from heaven to earth came. But why did they come to earth in the first place? Sitchin's answer was not for exploration or conquest in the traditional sense, but for survival. Nibiru's atmosphere was failing, deteriorating. Their scientists determined that suspending fine particles of gold in their upper stratosphere could create a protective shield and save their civilization from extinction. The problem was, Nibiru was poor in gold deposits. But there was one planet on their long orbital path that was rich in it: Earth. So around 450,000 years ago, Sitchin claimed, the Anunnaki launched a colonial expedition to Earth. They came not as gods, but as miners, as workers. They established their first base in the Mesopotamian basin, a place they called Aden, the home of the righteous ones, and began the arduous process of extracting gold from the earth through deep shaft mining. This explains the shift in the king list from the sacred city of Eridu to the industrial center of Bad Tibira, the fortress of the metalworkers, the refinery city. This leads to Sitchin's most shocking and controversial claim, the one that made him famous. The rank-and-file Anunnaki eventually mutinied against the back-breaking labor in the mines after thousands of years of toil. The leaders, brilliant genetic engineers named Enki and Ninhursag, came up with a solution. They would create a primitive worker, a slave race to do the digging for them. They didn't create life from scratch. They took the most advanced primate already on the planet, Homo erectus, and upgraded its DNA with their own genetic material through advanced biotechnology. Through a process of in vitro fertilization, using an Anunnaki female as a surrogate mother, they created the first Homo sapiens. They called their creation the Adamu, the Earthling, the one from Earth, the first Adam. We were, in Sitchin's view, bioengineered to be slaves, created to serve. The Sumerian king list in this context becomes the administrative record of this long-term colonial project, the corporate history. The antediluvian kings, Alulim, Al-Algar and the rest, were the Anunnaki commanders in charge of the Earth mission, the site directors and managers. their reigns measured in their home planet's long year, in Nibiru years rather than Earth years. Kingship descending from heaven was a literal memory of their arrival and the establishment of their command structure, their governmental system. The flood was a known recurring natural disaster caused by the gravitational pull of Nibiru passing through the inner solar system, which periodically caused the Antarctic ice sheet to slip catastrophically into the ocean. The Anunnaki leader Enlil saw the coming flood as a chance to wipe out their unruly human creation, to eliminate a problem that had gotten out of hand. While the scientist Enki, who had a fondness for his creation, who saw humans as more than just tools, secretly arranged for his human son, Utnapishtim, to survive by building the ark. After the flood, most of the Anunnaki left Earth, returned home, leaving humanity to govern itself under the guidance of kings who were descended from Anunnaki human hybrid bloodlines, like Gilgamesh, the two-thirds god, who carried their genetic legacy. To mainstream academia, Sitchin's work is pseudo history, built on forced translations and wild speculation, unsupported by scientific evidence. Astronomers have found no verifiable evidence of a planet like Nibiru in our solar system. But to his millions of followers worldwide, Sitchin is the man who cracked the code, who revealed the truth. His theory, whether right or wrong, whether factual or fantasy, is undeniably powerful because of its breathtaking scope. It takes all the disconnected, baffling pieces of the ancient past, the kingless numbers, the sudden explosion of Sumerian civilization, the global flood myth, the biblical stories of Genesis, the concept of gods who walk the earth, and snaps them together into a single coherent and magnificent picture. It transforms ancient myth into a misunderstood history of advanced technology, genetic engineering, and cosmic politics. It tells us that the gods were real, they were extraterrestrial, and their legacy is written not just on clay tablets in museums, but in our very DNA, in our genetic code. Whether we view the Sumerian king list as political propaganda, as garbled historical memory, or as a factual record of extraterrestrial contact, one thing is certain: it challenges us. It forces us to question our assumptions about the past. It reminds us that history is not a closed book, but an ongoing investigation, and that the greatest discoveries may lie not in digging deeper into the earth, but in looking with fresh eyes at the stories we thought we already knew. The mystery of the Sumerian kings endures, a silent, 4,000-year-old challenge to everything we think we know about who we are and where we came from.